Look at a chimpanzee. Look at a gorilla. Look at almost any primate on Earth. None of them cover their genitals. None of them feel shame walking around exposed. So, why do you? Picture this: a newborn baby, completely naked, completely unashamed. Then, picture that same child at 5 years old, suddenly taught to cover up, to feel embarrassed, to look away. Nobody is born with modesty. Somewhere between birth and childhood, something gets installed. And here's the strange part: humans are the only primate on the planet that consistently, almost universally, conceals its genitals. Not because of the cold, not always because of hygiene. Something deeper is going on. Something that starts almost 200,000 years ago in the dark around a fire, long before anyone had a word for private. So, what happened to us? Imagine a small band of early humans on the plains of East Africa, roughly 200,000 years ago. No clothing, no fabric, no concept of nudity as shameful because nothing about a body was hidden in the first place. At this point, humans were almost certainly naked all the time, the same as every other ape. There was no reason not to be. Fur had thinned out over a million years of evolution, likely to help the body release heat during long hunts across open, sun-baked land. Skin was exposed to sun and touch and eyes, and that was simply normal. But something started to shift. Not clothing yet. That comes later. First came something far stranger: a growing sensitivity around sex itself. Here's where it gets strange. Most female primates broadcast fertility loudly: swelling, coloring, obvious visual signals that say, unmistakably, now is the time. Human females lost that signal. Ovulation in humans is hidden, not just from others, but from the woman herself, unless she's tracking it carefully. No swelling, no obvious change. This is called concealed ovulation, and it's one of the strangest reproductive mysteries in the animal kingdom. Why would evolution erase such a useful signal? The leading theory sounds almost unbelievable. Concealed ovulation may have encouraged something rare among mammals: long-term pair bonding. If a male can't tell exactly when a female is fertile, he has an incentive to stick around all the time, not just during a brief fertile window. That constant closeness may have helped build stronger family units, with two parents investing in a slow-growing, helpless human infant. But here's the twist. If fertility itself became hidden and private, it's not a huge leap to imagine the organs behind that mystery becoming symbolically private, too. Concealment didn't start with cloth. It may have started biologically inside the body, long before it ever showed up on the outside. That's the theory. Not proven fact, but one of the most widely discussed explanations among evolutionary anthropologists. It's not the only one either. Some researchers argue concealed ovulation instead reduced violent competition between males, since no one could pinpoint the exact moment worth fighting over. Others think it simply reduced the risk of infanticide by making it harder for a new male to know which infants weren't his own. The details are still debated. What almost every version agrees on is the outcome. Humans became a species that hid its most important biological signal in plain sight. And it sets up an even bigger question. If evolution hid fertility, why did humans then go one step further and start hiding the body itself? Now, picture something more physical. A hunter-gatherer running through thornbush, wading through freezing rivers, crouching low to stalk prey through tall grass. Genitals are not like elbows or knees. They're soft. They're packed with nerve endings, among the densest concentrations of sensory nerves anywhere on the human body. That sensitivity exists for a reason tied directly to reproduction, but it comes with a cost. Exposed, unprotected genitals are extremely vulnerable to injury from thorns, insect bites, parasites, and blunt trauma. So even before shame entered the picture, there may have been a simple, practical reason to start covering that part of the body specifically, rather than the whole body evenly. Early wrappings, hide strips, and simple coverings weren't about modesty. They were about protection. But protection alone doesn't explain shame. It doesn't explain blushing, avoidance, or taboo. For that, something else had to happen. And it happened in the mind, not the body. Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn, and it comes from a strange source: lice. Human lice split into two separate species at some point in our history: head lice and body lice. The second adapted specifically to live in clothing. By studying when that genetic split happened, geneticists estimate that humans started wearing clothing regularly somewhere around 170,000 years ago, possibly earlier. That's not just a fashion timeline. That's a psychological turning point. Once clothing existed, covering became a choice, not just a default state of being unclothed. And the moment covering becomes a choice, uncovering starts to mean something. It becomes a signal. It becomes intimate. It becomes something you only reveal to certain people in certain moments. This is where anthropologists believe the deeper cultural machinery kicked in. Across nearly every documented human society, however different their customs, some version of a modesty rule around genitals shows up, even in societies with minimal clothing overall. The specific rules vary wildly by culture and era, but the presence of some rule is remarkably consistent. Some anthropologists point out something else. Even societies with almost no clothing at all, living in hot climates with minimal need for coverage, still developed some kind of genital covering, even if it was just a string, a sheath, or a small wrap. If clothing were purely about warmth, that wouldn't make sense. It suggests the impulse to cover that one specific area runs deeper than climate, deeper than fabric, pointing back to something psychological rather than practical. So what changed inside the human brain to make covering something so emotionally loaded? Picture two rival bands of early humans meeting for the first time near a river. Tension in the air. Every gesture matters. Every signal is being read. Humans evolved something almost no other animal has to this degree. An intensely social brain wired to constantly track reputation, belonging, and the judgment of the group. Being cast out of a small hunter-gatherer band wasn't a minor inconvenience, it could be a death sentence. Alone, without the group's shared knowledge, tools, and protection, an individual's odds of survival collapsed. Shame, uncomfortable as it feels, may have evolved as an internal alarm system, a way to avoid behavior that could get you rejected by the group. And because sex and reproduction sit at the center of alliances, jealousy, and social order, genitals became one of the most emotionally charged parts of the body to expose carelessly. Cover the vulnerable organ, hide the fertility signal, attach social meaning to exposure, punish careless exposure with shame. Layer by layer, across tens of thousands of years, biology and culture reinforced each other, until covering up stopped being a decision and started feeling like an instinct. So think back to that chimpanzee, walking around exposed without a flicker of self-consciousness. Somewhere along the human timeline, a hidden fertility signal, a vulnerable body part, an invented technology, and an intensely social brain all collided. The result wasn't just clothing, it was an idea. The idea that some parts of the body belong only to certain people, in certain moments, under certain conditions. An idea so old and installed so early in childhood that it feels less like culture and more like nature. Next time you get dressed without even thinking about it, remember, that instinct isn't as ancient as your bones. It's a story roughly 200,000 years in the making, written into behavior long before it was ever written into words. And maybe that's the real mystery, not why humans have private parts, but why it took so long for anyone to ask.